Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I'm going to be doing the 10 influential books tag. I was tagged by Susie from Read Susie Read. I will leave a link to her video down in the description. It's basically what it sounds like. You just talk about 10 books that had a major influence on your life in some sort of way. They don't necessarily have to be like the best books ever written or like great works of literature, but just as long as they impacted you in some way during your life. So the first book or series of books I'm going to talk about is the Ramona Quimby series by Beverly Cleary. This is the first book series that I remember really loving as a kid. Obviously I read a lot just growing up in general, but the Ramona series was the first series that I really attached myself to. Something about the way Ramona is written, I just like her character a whole lot. She's really fun and spunky, and she kind of questions everything, and she acts like an actual kid. I loved reading the books. Those were the first books that I would check out of the library, and I'm pretty sure I've read them all multiple times. I watched the TV show when the TV show existed back in the 90s on Saturday mornings, and there was even a movie, Ramona and Beezus, or Beezus and Ramona. I don't remember exactly what it was called, but it starred Selena Gomez. It came out 5 years ago or something like that, and I definitely watched that too. Next is the Sweet Valley High series. This was basically the next step up in terms of series I became obsessed with. I read every incarnation of this book series that existed. There was Sweet Valley High School, which was the main one, but I started out reading Sweet Valley Kids and Sweet Valley Junior High, I want to say it was called, and I even read the spin-off series, and I own the Unicorn Club first couple books in this series, which is a spin-off of the Junior High series, and eventually I did read the high school and college-based ones as well. I just really like this series a lot because I really liked the main characters. They are twins, Elizabeth and Jessica, and Elizabeth is sort of the bookish one who cares more about her studies than what her friends think, which is obviously a character I related to. And then Jessica is the one who really loved things like shopping and makeup, and she kind of wanted to be a part of the popular crowd and stuff like that. So I just really like the series, and I like the contrast between the twins and stuff like that. The next one on the list is sort of a cheat, and it's definitely not the only cheat on this list, but I'm combining two different books slash series. The first one is the Harriet the Spy book, and the second one is the Nancy Drew series. They both were basically how I got into mystery type of books. I really loved Harriet the Spy, and I really loved the movie version that came out in the 90s as well, and I really loved Nancy Drew a lot. I read basically every Nancy Drew book that I could get my hands on from the library, which is quite a few number of books. I love the idea of girl detectives, and when I was a kid and I read these books, I was so into the idea of being a girl detective that I legitimately walked around my neighborhood with a notebook and a pen trying to see if there were any crimes I could solve, but obviously there wasn't because I live in a slightly boring suburban town, which is probably a good thing. Next up is the Harry Potter series, and the specific book that I'm going to talk about from the series is Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I started reading the books after the first couple of books had already come out. My friend owned the books and she let me borrow the first couple ones, and so I read them and I really liked them, but it was as soon as I read this fourth book that I was like, holy cow. If you haven't read the series yet, one, I don't know what you're waiting for. But also, this is sort of like a game changer in the series. Things get a lot darker and more intense from this point forward. This also has the first major death. I read the first 4 books in a row, and then I had to wait for the 5th book to come out, which, as anyone who had to wait for these books knows, was absolute torture. And I think because of that, I was able to sort of join the online community as a supplement to the series as I waited for the next couple books to come out. So this is definitely the book that changed this series for me. Next is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This is my all-time favorite book. I talk about this book all the time. I had to read this the summer before my freshman year of high school as our summer reading book, and I just completely fell in love with it. I love all of the characters. I love just the morals that it teaches and just the ideas it brings up about the way to treat other people and just race relations. I even love the movie adaptation with Gregory Peck. This book just, oh, I read it all the time and I love it. Next is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I read this my sophomore year of high school, and obviously this isn't like the first classic that I read, and it's definitely not the first classic that I read and enjoyed, but I feel like Pride and Prejudice was a little bit of a game changer for me. Up to this point, I liked classics, but I wasn't like overwhelmingly excited about them, and this was the first classic that was fun and about romance and love and showed depth in characters while also being a love story. It's like I realized that classics don't just have to be stuffy, boring stories that obviously have meaning to them, but this one was just fun. It was really fun to read this and to experience the story. The next book on my list is The Devil Wears Prada. When I got into high school, the books that I started reading for fun were mostly mystery novels like John Grisham or Stephen King, or it was chick lit, and The Devil Wears Prada was sort of like a game changer in terms of chick lit for me. I think it's because it's not completely just chick lit. I think it's because it's a story that gives you a behind the scenes look about journalism, which is something that I was clearly interested in high school since I majored in journalism in college. I really just like that behind the scenes look at Vogue, and even though you don't really like what happens to the main character, I still kind of wanted to experience that life, and I felt like this was my first time being like, whoa, this is what it's like being in the industry. Next is A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. I read this my junior year of high school. I didn't read the whole thing my junior year of high school, but I had to take an American history class, as most US students have to do. My history teacher was really amazing, and she took excerpts of this book or chapters of this book and made it required reading for us, so she would basically just take chapters and photocopy it and pass it out. And this book sort of blew my mind. I felt like up until that point in my life, the American history that I was getting was sort of just very one-sided, rather dry and boring, and this book sort of opened my eyes to what American history really is. In case you don't know what this is, A People's History of the United States covers the aspects of American history that are often neglected. So they talk about Native Americans and they talk about important women in history and things like that. This book definitely shows sort of like the darker sides of American history, which I think is very important, but I felt like showing the darker sides made American history more interesting to me. While I love this country and everything, you know, no country is perfect by any means, and this was the first time where I was actually seeing that being taught to me, or it was actually being explained to me, and I feel like that year was the first year where I really started to enjoy history, and it really got me on my kick of enjoying American history. You know, after that point I started reading Sarah Vowell, and I went through these phases where I would read presidential biographies or even just other non-fiction books about American history, which is not something I tried to do before that point. Next is The Namesake by Jhumpa Lahiri. This is a book that I read in college, and it was, I'm pretty sure, the first book by an Indian American that I read both as the author and as the main characters. This book follows a couple that immigrates to America from India, and then they have a child, and it sort of follows both the parents and the child as they're growing up in this country and sort of the effects America has on them as a family and as individuals, and it deals a lot with the struggles that a lot of immigrant families I feel like deal with. This is the first time that I saw so much of myself in a single book, or at least this aspect of my life in a book. I can relate significantly to the main character Nickel, but also I felt like I saw a lot of my parents and the parents in this book. And I think reading this while I was at college and away from home also made a huge impact on how I took this book in, because it just really changed my viewpoint, and when I came back home I felt like I viewed my life and my parents and my past and my history just significantly differently after that point. And then for my last book, I'm actually cheating and showing two books because it's my channel and I do what I want. The first one is Crazy Love by Frances Chan. This is a Christian book that I read while I was in college that really changed how I viewed myself and my faith. This book talks about the idea of sort of lukewarm Christians, how a lot of Christians in America sort of just take the name of Christianity but don't actually act on the things that we're called to be or do while being Christians. A lot of people don't want to be challenged, or they don't want to do anything that makes them feel uncomfortable or feels weird to them or things like that, but we're sort of called by our faith to do things that we might not normally do, or things that are seen as slightly more radical or crazy in this world. You know, the idea of like loving people fully with our hearts, or sacrificing things that other people see as being valuable, you know, like stuff, like actual physical stuff, like sacrificing those things because we don't need those things, and so we could be helping other people with that money or time or whatever it is. So there's just a lot of those ideas. This is a really thin book, but it's also a really dense book. If you haven't read this book and you're interested in picking it up, I suggest, you know, reading it slowly and taking your time and really just going through and thinking about the things that Francis Chan talks about, because I feel like this really changed just how I view my own life, and now that I'm talking about this book, I kind of want to reread it as a refresher. And then the other book that I want to highlight is another Christian book called Plan B, and it's by Pete Wilson, who is a pastor in Nashville, I want to say. But I read that book at a very critical point in my life. There was a point in time towards the end of my college, beginning of my post-college life, where things were not going so great. That book just really helped me deal with that situation and realize that just because it might be my plan B, it was kind of God's plan A the whole time, which was something that was really difficult for me to accept. I think a lot of times we all have very specific plans for our lives, or what we want to do with our lives, or what we want to see with our lives, but you know, things don't always work out the way that we want them to. The idea that, you know, God has things in control and we just sort of have to trust in him sometimes that he'll take care of things is not an easy thing for a control freak like me to do. But that was a book that was very important at a very critical point in my life. So yeah, those are my 10, but actually 12 influential books. Thanks to Susie for tagging me, and I will leave some links to channels down below to people I tagged because, as usual, I didn't think about this in advance. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.